Welcome to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. This is Chris Miller. I invite you to join me as I interview artists from a variety of disciplines. We'll share powerful stories and lessons learned while making their art. This is Chris with the Spiritual Artist Podcast. I have a special guest today. Her name is Lisa Coyle. She is a yoga and meditation teacher, a holistic health coach, and Ayurvedic lifestyle specialist. She's also my meditation and yoga coach for the last 5 or 7 years. After attending her class, I've noticed this interesting correlation between your mind and your body. I'm looking forward to talking to Lisa about this relationship. As we progress and learn more and more about a spiritual artist, I would define a spiritual artist as someone that is consciously connected, present, and inspired while practicing their discipline. Let's take a look at what Lisa has to share. Lisa, good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
It's so great to have you in on this call.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be speaking with you.
The reason I wanted to talk to you so much is, as you know, I've done a lot of reading on new thought, spirituality, personal growth, and it's all been cerebral. You know, I put everything in my head. And after taking your class, I would sit there on the mat and hear you say something, and it would just move me so much. And I realized that oftentimes I've approached life from trying to use my mind to shift my body, whether that's eating practices or belief systems. But when I've worked with you, I've realized that there is a different direction you can go where the body can actually shift the mind. And I'm hoping you can open my eyes on this.
Well, that's beautiful. I love that observation. And it's always such a joy. This might devolve into a mutual admiration society for just a moment, but there's such a joy to have a student who is so open and interested and really is in practice more than just trying to stretch their hamstrings or fix a low back. As a teacher, when a student really hears these lessons that we're giving, it's so gratifying. So I appreciate you as a student very much. So what you're experiencing is, in yoga, we say the teachings reveal that there are layers to each human being, and that the body is the first layer that we are the most familiar with. It's the one we experience on a daily basis. It's very gross and dense. By gross, I don't mean yucky, right? But it's very dense and heavy, and it's very, temporal. It changes. There's a lot of sensation to it, so it's constantly drawing our attention. It is the furthest removed in terms of the layers that the yogis say that we have, which there are 5, and we can go through that real quickly. But it is the layer that's furthest removed from who we truly are. So the body is the least subtle and the most worldly, most earthbound part of us. And so we're very caught up in it. And the mind is not just below the body, but the mind is actually 2 levels closer to the self than the body. So between the body and the mind is what they call the energetic body, or the body of breath or energy. And so in yoga, what we do as we're working with the body, which you're familiar with, is we use the breath in very specific, intentional ways to create this link between the body and the mind. So the breath is really the bridge that we use because we have anatomical muscular capability to manage the flow of our breath. But then also the body is going to breathe whether we do anything about that or not, right?
That's interesting, because as I was taking your classes, I remember, you listen to the teacher talk, and some of it just goes right over your head. And I remember suddenly realizing how important breath was. And you said it all the time, but suddenly I listened.
Well, and we all are like that. We are all like that. And we hear something over and over again, and it just doesn't sink in, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the important thing to remember as a student is that you'll hear it when you're ready to hear it.
Right.
So, to allow a certain level of ease.
But what I think that's so special about you is you create what I call space.
Mm,
When people walk into that room, there's a feeling to the room
mm,
that you hold for people. I've taken classes in painting, and I used to go to Santa Fe and have a mentor, and I always noticed how she held that room.
mm,
There was a consciousness that she held, and when you go in there, you knew it was a safe place,
mm.
and you knew that you could explore, and I love that about you. That's why I keep coming to your class and seeking you out, and I think that's why so many people do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I will, again, as a fellow student, I will just say that what you're experiencing is and I feel that when I'm with my teacher, and I think as a new teacher, that was not necessarily always the case in my class.
Mhm.
And I could feel as I taught more when that was happening. And you have to, and this is where I think it's so integral into what you were talking about on this podcast, that there is, and I loved Robin, the guest
Yeah.
that you had.
Uh-huh.
So what she was talking about, I was listening to, and we said, oh, so many of these lessons you just hear over and over and over again in different genres. But what she was talking about, I kept going, yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
That when you learn as a teacher, just like a student, to trust the process, you allow yourself as a teacher to also be held in that space, so that I am holding space for you, and I have the knowledge and the experience, right, to guide you through your practice. But what happens in a yoga class where everybody's in one room together, someday that will happen again, is that there's an alchemy. Really, there's a magic that happens. But I truly believe it is that the students really only feel it when the teacher is also able to surrender into that. And by that, what I mean is, I don't want to get too woo woo and out there, but it is that what Robin described as that one energy. In yoga, we would just call it consciousness. And consciousness in the yoga tradition, or in this application that we're talking, is present. And consciousness is intelligent. And consciousness is loving and compassionate and incredibly spacious, and has room for everything at all times with no differentiation. So as a teacher, when you are able to use, yes, your intellectual knowledge and training and experience to properly guide your students, you do have to have that. It's critical, by the way. But then when you've been teaching long enough, or you're just gifted, and as some new teachers actually are, to just allow yourself to let consciousness hold the whole space. But my experience is that happens mostly for students when the teacher is able to do it.
Interesting, because they set the tone, and
Exactly. And students are giving themselves to the teacher,
right.
And so if the teacher is all up in their head, then typically the students will be as well.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, because for the last 6 weeks since this whole social distancing started, I have been at home, and I let my yoga go, and I did call in a couple times
Yeah.
and do it online, but it started. I can feel it. I can feel it in my body. The tension is coming up, and so taking the class last night, it was like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
oh thank God. And I wanted to tell you this. I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but over the years, sometimes I would be doing a practice, especially when I had some emotion that I was going through. My father passed away a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And I remember I was dealing with it. I'm fine. And then I
Uh-huh.
would be doing yoga in your session, and suddenly I would just feel some tears come to my eyes, because there was this release,
Yeah.
this release of the hurt, the loss. My father was gone. And I'm like, where is this coming from? I'm just doing poses, right? I'm just doing poses.
I love that. I love that. And, one of what my teacher, Rod Stryker, Yoga Rupa Rod Stryker, always says, that if you have not cried on your mat yet, just because it's going to come, it's going to happen. And the reason that it does is that the body carries the burdens that are held by the mind. And the mind is holding burdens and memories and thoughts and feelings and emotions. And when those become either overwhelming or we just deem them as inconvenient, we shove them down.
Huh.
And the body, being this amazing receptacle that it is, just holds it for us. But it's just holding it without some sort of an intentional practice. It's just going to stick there. And what yoga allows us to do is to let the body then transform that energy, which all thought is just energy, whether it's an intellectual idea or an emotion. It's just energy. Emotions are stored in the body, intellectual ideas just move around. So those emotions get stored in the body. And so when we move the body in such a way, the breath, remember then, is that bridge.
Right.
That's that. Then now the mind and the body are coming together again, and whatever is in the body is either going to come out in the form of emotion, or it may come to the mind as a revelation, or sometimes there's actually a physical experience like excessive sweating or nausea, or coughing or laughing, or sometimes
I've had that happen too, where I just start laughing.
Yeah.
I'll just leave your class and I'm laughing and I'm like, why am I laughing? But I think I've shared this with you that Eckhart Tolle, he talks about the pain body.
Yes.
And how we hold that pain. And it's really interesting. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to share this with my listeners for, is it's tough. We're going through tough times. We're isolated. We're stuck in our house with our family who we love, but really close. We're losing that opportunity for our practice, where we go to yoga. And so it's important to realize that your body can be a release, whether you do yoga online or go out and shoot some hoops or jog.
Exactly. No, it's absolutely right. And listen, any physical movement is good for your body and your mind. It's just true. Any physical movement, obviously done safely, is good for your body and your mind because it is moving energy that gets stuck. And, I also had another teacher who said, I loved this phrase. He'd say, I take my trash out every Tuesday, but I don't always pick through it. And so sometimes just feeling better is enough. And sometimes, though, these things might come up often enough that requires some reflection and contemplation on our part, to understand, why does something keep coming up for me?
Well, what's so interesting about that metaphor with taking your trash out is I have a tendency to be the type A person. And I want to look at each piece of trash and figure out why. Why am I feeling this way? And sometimes going right up against it like that is just not the way to go.
Well, and again, if we want to just, beat this metaphor to death, which I love to do, is, I would say in terms of like what kind of things in your trash you're picking through is like, what's really stinky? Some things just get put in there because they belong in the trash.
Right.
But other stuff maybe starts to stink because it's been in there too long, so that maybe just the stinky parts that we really need to look at.
And so the idea being is that sometimes we don't have to think through problems.
Yeah. So the mind, though, so let's go back to, so the body is the first layer, the energy body is the second, the breath. The mind is the third layer. So again, another phrase is that the mind makes a wonderful servant and a horrible master. Mm-hmm. So in yoga, we look at the mind as, gosh, I listened to before I'm going to go off on just a tiny bit of a tangent. So I'll hope
that's all right. We're good.
I listened to a lovely lecture the other day from my teacher's teacher, and he is Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat of the Himalayan Institute, brilliant, beautiful soul. And he was saying that for every ailment, its cure is right next to it. And I loved that. And it really kind of made me look at the intrinsic power that we all have to heal from whatever it is that we're going through. And sometimes it feels like we cannot possibly get through what it is we're going through. But yoga says your mind got you there because it was clouded and messed up, out of balance and confused. But your mind can also heal you. It can solve this problem for you, but only until we get all of the cloudiness off of the mind. So the mind has to then be, my teacher calls it, each layer of the being has to be glorified and purified in order for us to see reality properly. So that clouded mind created our suffering, but the clearing of the mind is one of our first doorways to freedom. So we have to clear the mind out. We can't look at it as the enemy all the time, because it really is. We have to go through that layer of our being to then get to the body of beliefs, which is just under the mind, which psychology would call that the subconscious mind.
Right.
And in yoga, we see no real differentiation between subconscious and unconscious. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I've used the metaphor of a snow globe, and you know, when it's all shaken up, and I, in my own life, I see, I'm like, I just can't see anything but the blizzard.
I love that.
Yeah. And, you know, when it all settles, and I get that, you know, last night when I took your class and you just work through it, and how you walk us through, what is it, the Nidra process?
Yoga Nidra, yeah.
Nidra. And it's wonderful where you just kind of shut down that mind, and I follow along with you. I'm going to bring this up, and I know I don't know how to say it. The points of light.
Yes. Yeah, you are. Yeah. So that, I know that's your favorite one. And I knew going in, I was like, you were there, and now we were not going to do one point. And I know you never are happy when you don't get your points of light. But so there's different ways of practicing. But what you're referring to is a practice called the 61-point relaxation practice, or the yogic name is the Shavayatra practice, which translates to the journey through the corpse, or journey of the corpse. So the corpus, right, the body. So the 61 points are taking awareness, and generally we can either just rest our attention at that point. It is easier for most of us if we use something there, like a point of light, or a flame, or a color like a dot or something, just some way of taking the mind more in a more concrete way into a place that's very, very subtle. So it's moving the mind through these various points that in the tradition are considered intersections in the body where there's a lot of energy. Ever different energetic pathways come together in these connection points, there's more energy. So we take our mind through these places of energy, and they're mostly, as you experience, there's the center of the brain, there's the throat, the shoulder joints. It goes through all the major joints, fingertips and toes, and then it goes down the spine to the base to the sacrum, which is the top of the pelvis, and that's when it then shoots down into the legs. So it's moving awareness through the body and seeing light at those points. And what's super helpful, so that there's a physiological benefit to that's subtle, but it's definitely happening. But what it helps with the mind is to corral its movement. And you and I both have very active minds. Most of us do, but some of us, our minds just tend to move more rapidly than others. And that's having something like that that's specific, that is just a nice container, you know, for the mind. And one of Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat's teachings is that the mind is only really calm when it is at home in the body. And those of us who practice yoga, we feel that, you know, when our mind is thinking, it's spinning, and our image is that the thoughts are almost in a cloud bubble over our head, right? That the mind is spinning and our thoughts are out there. But the minute we can bring the mind into the body and actually rest it somewhere in our body, these places of energy are most effective and easiest for the mind to rest in, the mind automatically gets pretty quiet and it gets more still. And that, in the teaching of Yoga Nidra, then, when that mind becomes more quiet, more still, we can actually make it go to sleep and still be aware. And that's when we get this amazing physiological benefit of being in deep rest. It's the brain wave at that moment is identical to our brain waves in deep non-REM sleep, where the body really heals and repairs and detoxifies. So that is, from the physiological perspective, that's why Yoga Nidra is so incredibly healing, is that we're able to take ourselves on purpose to a place of deep healing and deep rest.
I definitely think that has helped me. For our listeners, what I do is I'm almost projecting my mind into that point of light. And if it's at the wrist, suddenly my mind isn't in above my head, as you were saying, but it's in my wrist, and then it's in my elbow, then it's in my shoulder. And it's so dang busy going through those places that it can't do the monkey mind thing.
Right. Yeah. It's like a little leash, just keeping you tethered in the body.
And it keeps you on. And what's funny, when you talk about going into that place, that's where I get creative inspiration as an artist. That's where something will just pop in my head. You get that divine idea, and it's like, I should do this, or I should call that person. It's that middle ground, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so that without your mind, though, so you never would have been able to receive that information and to then act on it.
Right.
So your mind it's the problem and the cure sitting right next to each other. So I'm really contemplating that more, and I'm going to listen to, I think Panditji has another talk on that. I loved that, especially right now, as you say, during the pandemic. There's just so much that we're all going through separately, but collectively. And even though, some people are really using this time for contemplation, I'm very blessed that I'm in a situation where I can use this time for more practice and more study and more contemplation. But some people, this is really, really bad. They're fearful. They're losing their income. There are people who are battling addiction, and to be alone with stress in these times is dangerous for them. There are people who are in unhealthy living situations, so we're all in, having a challenging experience, but for some of us, our challenges are very, very different. And when you look at it in that regard, honestly, as a teacher, that's why I need more contemplation around that. How, for somebody who is in an unhealthy living situation, how is their cure sitting right next to their problem?
Right.
So from a student, as a student, I want deeper clarity on that. But at the same time, from my own perspective, I can look back on challenges that I've had through my life, and I can see, the cure was sitting right next to that problem. It was right there. Of course, I didn't see it.
No.
Right? Mind was clouded. Took
Right.
a while for the mind to get clear enough to see that. So again, it requires a certain level of trust, and that you have to be able to find some way, some tools or technique that allow you to get the mind to find clarity so that you can see. Because consciousness, the teaching says, and I think this is your creative muse and inspiration, that field that you talk about, consciousness is just right there. It's all around us. It's in us. It's right there. And it's the thinnest sheath away from our understanding. And, as a student, it's like, okay, I believe that. I really do. And sometimes I feel it, and other times it's like the cloud is so thick.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned that even though you've been doing this for 18 some years, you still jump back and forth between the role of a teacher and a student.
Absolutely. So I've been a student since I was 19. I've been teaching since I was 18. And so I'm 58. So I've been a student for a long, long time. And so I've traveled many, many paths as a student. Some of them a good student, some of them a bad student, some of them as a rebellious and lazy student.
We've all been there, right?
Yeah, but lately I've been very, very happy in, sort of what I think the second or third act of my life, where now I'm steady, I'm still enough to where my studentship has improved greatly.
Yeah, and I love that. I think there is a bit about maybe this is the planet or whatever making us be still.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I think I think nature is just like, you people have got to sit down. So again, here's another tangent. My son loves artisanally brewed beers. And so he went down, I'll give a little shout out to a cute little brewery called Peticolas Brewery. And he went down to get some beers, and he brought one back, and it's called Sit Down or I'll Sit You Down. I thought, that's what my grandfather used to say, but that's kind of what nature did. Yes. She said, okay, sit down or I'll sit you down.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm going nuts. And you just got to, everybody has to tap the brakes. Let's take a pause. And we see how some people have settled into this stillness and this pause, and other people, it's making them freak out.
I go back and forth.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, we see that as teachers, we see that, with students who we ask to be still and who are very uncomfortable with stillness, and what my teacher, he says that jitteriness is not coming from your body.
That's interesting, because that was another lesson I learned taking your classes. I realized early on that you'd be having us hold a pose, and I'd be shifting and shifting and shifting. And now I'm able to just hold it.
Yeah. That is your mind.
Yeah.
That is 100% your mind. And again, we give a lot of power to the body. Well, my body feels like this, so I have to respond to that.
Right.
Mind is like, okay, it just follows around, just does what it's, kind of follows its own craziness. The body responds to those sensations. I mean, the mind responds to the body's sensations. So if we're not used to taking a break from the chatter of the mind, then we can go, oh my gosh, my thighs are burning. Oh my gosh. And we can't think about anything else. Right?
No, that's why I love it, because it's the pain of holding the pose. I'm focused on the pain, and my mind stops it. It just shuts up, it shuts up, because it's like, oh my God, that wrist.
Yeah.
But that's not to scare people, because it's a wonderful experience. I don't mean to scare anybody. And it is true. It's about that, training the mind, so to speak. I noticed something in the class last night that you said, and I love it, because this is another thing I've learned when I'm taking your class. You always say these wonderful things, and my mind is grabbing it and trying to hold it. And I'm like, but I got to do the next pose. But last night you said, feel that the more you can let go, the more you are supported. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my gosh, this should be on a quote. This should be sent out social media, right? Feel that the more you can let go, that you're actually the more you are supported. And that goes back to what you were just saying. The answer is right there.
It's right there. And yes, so that particular phrase used to come to me a lot in my own nidra practice, just like, because I'm a holder. I'm very physical, I'm very body bound. And so I'm really wrapped up in all the sensations, my mind is like, can get really distracted by all the sensations. And it's just like, let go. And then you can actually feel your body on the floor.
Wow.
Because you can't feel the floor underneath you if you're holding your body up away from it, out of habit, unconsciously. Then you can let go. And now you're really actually being held. And during the Yoga Nidra certification that I did with my teacher, 9-day training, after over a year of study of that particular technique, he said during one of the Yoga Nidra things, the more you can let go, the more you will be supported. And I almost sat up. I was like,
that's
wait a minute. Did I think of that, or did I hear it from him?
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know. Who knows? Consciousness.
Well, we're all connected, like you were talking about.
So who cares what it came from? But there's so many broad applications to it, not just lying on the floor trying to relax. But the more you can, as a teacher, that's that creative place that we began the conversation talking about, the more you can let go and let consciousness hold the space, the more you're supported and the more your students are supported. And from a practical standpoint, as a teacher, you use a lot less energy. It can be exhausting trying to figure everything out for every single body in the room.
Right.
Using your mind and feeling personally responsible for every single body in the room is exhausting. And when consciousness is holding the space, and as a teacher, and when you're allowing yourself to be carried by that energy, and again, want to reiterate, using your training and your knowledge and your expertise, now you are not even effortlessly taking care of all your students, because it's not you doing it. It's consciousness. So it's so much more effortless, and yet a deeper, richer experience as a teacher. Excuse me, but I think my students, the more that I've been able to do this as a teacher, my students benefit. And so I would love to say thank you for it. I just say thank you to my teacher for bringing me as his student into that place. And my teacher, whenever he is addressing somebody who said, oh, well, you did this for me, or you did that for me, he will say, I'm so glad I've been blessed with an amazing teacher.
Wow.
And so that was one of the things that most attracted me to him. And now I feel the truth of that. It's not about really any of us individually, but it is about all of us collectively. And we all can hold each other up.
Right. And not only are we sometimes the student and sometimes the teacher, but we also have teachers. We all, I have to say, I think that about you all the time, and I love coming in and doing and practicing with you. And even online, you can feel that presence.
I tell you, that's this being in the online world, trying to teach in my little empty room to the little green light on the computer, and I can see the faces, but my video has to be bigger, so I'm looking at myself, which is distracting. And so, I've talked to some of my other teacher friends, and again, just to repeat from the beginning, of that there is an alchemy, that word that means that there's just this magical transformation from one thing to another that occurs in a yoga class and it's consciousness. And so where you have this individual teacher and all of these other individual students, and we all come in from our disparate places with all of the different conversations going on in our individual minds. And we all come to a place by grace. The teachings are that we are all delivered into that place through grace, that ability to surrender into consciousness. And that's where we are all.
Well, I think well, thank you. I mean, thanks for taking this time and talking to me on this podcast. I'm so excited. Like I said, I think we're all doing the same thing. We're all being creative spiritual artists, but in different disciplines.
Yes.
I look forward to talking to you soon, and I will see you later.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.